Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to our WAPA meeting today. It's a subject that I know is of interest to all of us. I spent a good bit of time today trying to find cleaning solutions that weren't in plastic, and it's very difficult. Anyway, so this is going to be great. I really am looking forward to it. I want to welcome everybody who is a member, and if you're not a member, welcome, and you should consider joining. So I'm going to turn it over to Lori Krieger, who's going to introduce our speaker for today, and let's get started. Enjoy everything. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Sure.
Thanks to the wonders of Zoom, there are some silver linings. We can have speakers from out of town, and Dr. Kathleen Skosen is in Connecticut right now. So in 2019, Pathak and Mark Nichter, published an article in Medical Anthropology Quarterly titled The Anthropology of Plastics, an Agenda for Local Studies of a Global Matter of Concern. In the article, they chastised anthropologists for ignoring the huge problem of plastics in our environment. And it is true that very few anthropologists have pursued plastics as a subject for study. But our speaker tonight, Dr. Kathleen Skosen, is one of the very few who have. Dr. Skosen is professor of anthropology at Southern Connecticut State University and one of the only anthropologists who is an expert on plastic. For more than 3 decades, Dr. Skosen has conducted fieldwork in the northwest region of the Dominican Republic, Samaná, where she previously served as a Peace Corps volunteer. Her work has focused on community development, women's health, the life course, and tourism. But she has also been interested in plastic and plastic waste for a number of years. She developed a capstone applied anthropology course focused on plastic use in the United States, drawing on her interest and activism on environmental issues, as well as research on plastics. I encountered Dr. Skosen because I work for USAID Clean Cities Blue Ocean program, whose goal is to prevent land-based plastics from getting into the ocean. I was researching environment in the DR, one of the places where we would be working, when I encountered Kathleen's amazing article on Samaná, the very place where we would be working. I was so taken with the depth and sophistication of knowledge of the environment and the people that I contacted her. We were able to hire Kathleen as a consultant, and she's been collaborating with one of our grantees in Samaná for research on plastic. But that's not what Dr. Skosen will be talking about this evening. This evening, she'll be talking about the social life of plastic. Kathleen, it's up to you.
My audio. Well, thank you very much, Lori. I will see if I can figure out how to unmute my visual there. Oops. I did that. So thank you very much for having me, for the invitation, Suzanne, and especially Lori, who's been a wonderful colleague over this last year that we have been in lockdown, as it were. I really appreciate this invitation. I'm really honored to be here, and I hope I don't disappoint too much. I would imagine a lot of us have been thinking about a lot of other things in the last few days, to say the very least. You know, we're in a bit of a strange situation at the moment. In any case, I've been a bit distracted, and I have indeed, as Lori mentioned, been focused on plastic for a few years. I have developed a seminar on applied anthropology on plastic. I've gotten a real education about applied anthropology on the ground in the last year as well. And we do hope, you know, that all of us, as we are more sensitized to this issue, will start, you know, I'm sure we're all doing what we can individually already. But I think we really need to step it up when we look at the accumulated mess that our planet is in because of plastic. I'm going to share a PowerPoint. I'm going to share my screen and move to doing a PowerPoint. Not sure, I'm not real great on Zoom. I usually use Teams, but hopefully this should go without a hitch. So let's see. Share screen.
It's working.
It's working? Okay, so let me see if I can do my slideshow. So, as we said, we're going to be focused on plastic today, and as normal for an anthropologist, I don't know that I'm going to really fulfill the promise of the social life of plastics per se. I think it's suggested in the title, but just to pull out a quote from a somewhat recent actually, it's more recent than Apatorized work on this, in the annual reviews of Anthropology. The author says, like persons, objects may be born when they are first made, live social lives as they are entangled in various relationships with humans and other objects, and then die when they are finally destroyed or abandoned or otherwise no longer have those entanglements. They may, however, also have an afterlife when, for example, archaeologists or others rediscover such objects and put them in museums or reuse them in other ways. Telling their stories can provide insights into the social worlds they inhabit. And I think that's a really apt quote for a couple of reasons. At one level, it's very accurate when we talk about plastic, but on the other hand, plastics don't really ever die. Their afterlife is almost a primary focus today. When we look at plastics, it is an indestructible material. And in the last couple of decades, the durability of this has been on full display with, for example, the great Pacific Ocean patch, plastic garbage patch. So we are really getting a lesson in how durable this substance is. So where does it begin? Well, plastic, despite being probably the most ubiquitous human artifact, is only a little over a century old. It was cooked up by a New Yorker, Leo Backlund, and it's where we first get Bakelite. It's a completely synthetic polymer. It's from 1907, and I draw on some work by a reporter who wrote a wonderful book about plastic, A Toxic Love Story. And she calls it, a new kingdom in our taxonomic order of the world. So that's, the name that was given to this first polymer. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but there's another quote from her book. The Greek root of the word plastics can be used as an adjective or a verb, but not as a noun, which is probably truer to the nature of plastic than anyone imagined when the word was first coined. Although we talk about plastic as a thing, it doesn't have the thingness, the kind of grounded organic identity found in natural substances. Wood, stone, metal, mineral, all have innate properties that dictate how we use them and how we think about them. But a piece of plastic is essentially inscrutable, offering few clues as to its past or future. Though specific properties may be engineered into any given polymer, the only innate quality defining plastics as a family of materials is their plasticity, their ability to be whatever we need them to be. And the first Bakelite products were often replacing things like combs and high value items that not a lot of people necessarily had widespread access to. But it quickly became a substance that was the miracle substance of the early 1900s. and kind of morphed into many different milieus, if you will. So the consumption of plastic by 1940 worldwide, there was almost no consumption of plastic, very little. It was a very slow start. And then when Tupperware hit in 1946, some of you might remember Tupperware. I think it still exists, but it certainly has a lot more competition now. That really gave a boost to the whole plastic project. DuPont, a spin-off, then Dow, chemicals are, you know, famous for their creation of all different kinds of polymers. General Electric here in Connecticut, you know, one of the founding corporations in the state. Legos, Frisbees, Ziploc bags. You could fill in, you know, what your favorite plastic items might be. And there probably are many different things that you use on a daily basis that you would very much miss. So up from almost no plastic consumption in the 1940s, we're now at approximately 35.7 million tons. And that was up from 390 tons in 1960. So we've had this exponential boom in plastic production. And of course, as I'm sure everyone also knows, I hope I'm not, you know, I'm speaking to the choir, so to speak, but you can see that we've had this growth in the generation of plastic. We didn't even start thinking about recycling into the 1980s. And then it was a very slow uphill climb. And we are, you know, maybe, you know, less than 10% of our plastic is being recycled. Using it for combustion, you can see that's increased. Using it for energy, which has its own downfalls. And then the majority of plastic is still being placed in landfills across the United States. So the word plastic itself is a cause for confusion. We've referenced that already. We use it in the singular and indiscriminately to refer to any artificial matter, but there are tens of thousands of different plastics. And rather than making up a single family of materials, they are more loosely a collection of clans. I love her choice of words there. And you folks are probably familiar with this. We get told in our local dump that anything that has a triangle on it should be recycled, should be in the recycle bin. And we know that also, we know that's not true, that there's a lot of things with triangles that never make it into the recycling loop. They're way too expensive. Things like bottles, soda bottles and water bottles, and even milk jugs have found markets. They're relatively easy to recycle, but some of the other ones, the boxes that they now put your spinach in or your lettuce at the grocery store, these kind of clamshell boxes, are too expensive and don't get recycled and really kind of screw up things when they get thrown into the recycle bin. But Frenkle, who wrote this book I'm referencing, tried a little experiment. She wanted to go through the day and see if she could have one day where she was completely avoiding plastic. It quickly morphed into a day where she just recorded everything that she touched that was plastic. And if we sit and think about this, we can imagine, you know, how our day begins. And I'm just going to take us to our ride to work, assuming we're still going to work. But, you know, you start with your alarm clock. If you're like me, you probably check your phone pretty quickly to find out what's going on in the halls of power. You might end up making a quick trip to the loo. Probably you're going to brush your teeth. All of this touching plastic all the way through. You might jump in the shower and wash your hair. You might put some cream on your face. If you go on and put makeup on your face, more plastic. Your coffee might be brewed at home in a plastic coffee maker. or some combination of plastic there. You might throw some milk in your coffee out of a plastic jug. You might skip the whole home brew thing and go down the street and get Dunkin' Donuts, which comes in a nice plastic, cup. If you're doing Starbucks, it's lined, your paper cup is lined with plastic, so you don't get to avoid it there. The key to your car is plastic. Almost everything in your car is plastic. And that is, we're leaving out obviously some steps along the way. If you have pets or, doing other things in your morning routine, we are just surrounded by plastic. It's just become ubiquitous in our lives, considering that 100 years ago, it was pretty much absent. So moving on, we can start think about how plastic was mass produced in 1950, and all the plastic produced, half of all plastic that has been produced as of 2017 was produced in the last 13 years. So there's this exponential growth I already referenced. And so during our day as individuals, we're exposed to plastic, but we're also exposed to plastic throughout our life. And we can think about it, maybe not myself, but certainly my children were born into a world of plastic. So you get babies that are basically placed immediately in little plastic clamshells. And when we take baby home, even if we have a nice wooden crib, we have bumpers and all kinds of pads that are made of plastic. If we're giving our baby bottles, often they're, probably everyone now gives their babies their formula in plastic. It comes out of a plastic bottle and goes into another plastic bottle. If it goes into the microwave, they're getting a very big dose of plastic there. All our toys for our babies are plastic. Furniture, all plastic. Again, toys, more toys in plastic. Even organic food comes in plastic and is served with nice little plastic spoons. Sitting in a plastic high chair, of course. And then as children move on, they're getting more and more plastic, which, this is the world we live in. And just to borrow from some of my biological anthropology friends, this is a mismatch. The idea that we have wrapped our children and ourselves in plastic is not the context under which we evolved as a species. And so we're having kind of a big experiment with all of these synthetic chemicals. The base of the polymers were not there for us through any of our evolutionary history. So these mismatched conditions cause all kinds of problems. Early on in my interest in plastics, which goes quite a ways back, but was a 1997 movie on hormone imposters. And I don't know if any of you folks ever got a chance to see that movie. It was put out by Bullfrog Films, and it's an excellent movie. But they kind of document this whole, evolution of plastic. In 1997, it's more than 20 years ago now. One of the questions they ask is, will milk processed through plastic tubes, then microwaved in a plastic baby bottle, affect a child's development? They look at many different levels of how plastic is affecting us in this 1997 movie, but they also go out into the environment and show how it's also, into our ecosystems. Even back then, we had the warning signs that there was a problem with plastics leaching into our environment, plastics affecting these ecosystems of which we are obviously a part. Moving on, I have a very tangential association with the Environment and Human Health, Inc. group. I follow their work closely. They're a group of physicians out of Yale University, physicians and researchers, and they have been following the plastics issue for a number of years in documenting many of the problems that are, introduced as we continue to have this large experiment with these chemicals. So these, a fetus today is exposed in the womb to plastics. There has been plastic found in the umbilical cords of, babies in vitro. So there's just this incessant exposure. Then when babies are born and they're bottle fed, they're getting big doses of microplastics. So these, it's again this kind of leaching of these chemicals into whatever food they are, using to be stored. So this is a deep concern for all of us. As we know, there's a lot of issues that are potentially a problem there. And so we're starting to document in, even at the molecular level, some of the health threats that plastics cause. So this has been really important because we're exposed to, there's about 1,000 chemicals that are commonly used in the United States. Some of them, not all of them, have been studied, and a few of them have been studied in the cocktail form that we experience. That is to say that we're not just getting one chemical at a time, we're often getting several chemicals throughout the day. When I put on my makeup and then over my, some other cream, my skin protection cream, or whatever it is, you go to the hairdresser, there's a whole bunch of chemicals there. So we're getting these exposures on top of exposures that are really a concern to scientists. So we know these chemicals are primarily endocrine disrupting chemicals, and they can intensify or be the cause for conditions like obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and some types of cancer. So there's been a lot of reports of the pernicious effects of these endocrine disrupting chemicals. And we are looking at that specifically at fetuses, the fetal growth and neurological disorders, disruptions to thyroids. There's a whole host of disruptions. And just to give you, not all of these chemicals are plastics, but bisphenol A is here, phthalates are here, two of the most commonly used chemicals in products that we use on a daily basis. Polycystic ovary syndrome, low sperm counts, some of these plastics are affecting Homo sapiens at the evolutionary level. Our ability to reproduce. There's a lot of concern around this. So I don't know if you folks have paid much attention to the whole, the salmon in the Pacific Northwest and what was killing off the salmon. There was a recent report that came out of late that finally identified what it was that was affecting the coho salmon in a river in Washington. And it turned out to be a plastic that was being used in rubber tires. So again, starting to really infiltrate into our environment. There is very few places on Earth where we're not finding these chemicals. So of course, introduced COVID, and I'm sure you folks have probably seen, as I have, if you make it to the grocery store or walk your dog, people are throwing masks away. They throw plastic gloves away. And a lot of these, I'm in Connecticut on the coast, and you folks are on the coast as well, big storms just wash these things right into the ocean when they're not being thrown directly into the ocean. So this Hong Kong-based group estimates that there's 1.56 billion face masks that have been flooded into our ocean in 2020. Just an astonishing number. And those blue face masks that you often might be given when you walk into a store, they're kind of pleated, they're ubiquitous, they're everywhere as well. Those are made up of plastic. So the homemade rewashable ones, not so much, but the ones that are given out at hospitals or stores or wherever you might, doctor's offices, those are made of plastic, and they're also notably disposable. I mean, I think they're treated as a disposable item. So this is why they're being thrown away, and we're finding them, you know, quite a few of them in the ocean, to say the least. And what happens in the ocean is that what we have are, they break down. Now, I'll come back to the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in a minute, but what happens is that garbage doesn't stay there indefinitely. It might sink. Eventually, it will break down into microplastics. And there's 8 million tons of plastics are thrown into the ocean annually, and about 1/4 of those are microplastics. And I'm sure most of us have heard all of this, that, you know, this is often mistaken for food. It's a huge problem because animals eat this, and then they're not getting any nutrition for it, and they might not digest it. And I'm sure you've seen the birds and the whales and other animals when you open them up and their guts are just full of plastic. So it's being consumed by wildlife, but coral reefs, and this is a huge range, 4 to 89% more likely to die if they are being contaminated by plastic. That's a huge range. I'm not really sure why it is, but we also know that coral supports 25% of all life in the ocean. By 2015, we think plastic will outweigh fish in the ocean by 2050, unless we make some pretty big changes. And we know that those microplastics are working their way back into our food chain. So this has been documented in the Great Lakes. It's not just the oceans, it's also local rivers and local lakes that are being contaminated by plastic. As I mentioned earlier, it is literally everywhere we find where we go. So in some pristine locations where there's very little human activity, where you wouldn't expect to find plastic, we're finding plastic. So, you know, here is the ubiquitous flip-flop that's everywhere. Again, contaminating our oceans, and, you know, almost as durable as coral there. Here is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch that sits there, but there is now a garbage patch in every major ocean. Oh, every ocean, I guess. So we know that the oil and natural gas is the base of plastic. So there has been plastic wars. I don't know how many of you folks caught this Frontline special. It's an excellent special on plastic, and kind of documents what's been going on with plastic recycling, particularly since China stopped taking our plastic, I think in 2018. And we have long known that recycling is not the solution to the plastic problem, and that really what recycling is doing is basically making us all feel better about all the plastic that we consume. It allows us to go shopping without guilt. It allows us to, you know, open our recycle bin and throw stuff in there and not have to think twice about what is happening to our waste. And this is a conversation I have had with my friends in the Dominican Republic, because even though it seems like they have a lot of plastic waste, you know, pound for pound, we obviously, just per capita even, we very much outweigh what they produce. It's just that it's more visible in the developing world, And sometimes that visibility is because that's where we are sending our garbage. So we, you know, in the United States, and not all of us, I don't mean to generalize, but most of us just put our garbage out to the, you know, street, and it goes away and we never even think twice about it. And that is starting to change a little bit in terms of who is taking our waste now. So, you know, there is a project by a company from Taiwan who wanted to build a big plastic petrochemical plant that's put on hold. But again, we are being, you know, the tables have turned. First of all, I don't know how many of you folks are doing this, but I think we're all trying to be more energy efficient. We're trying to reduce our use of oil and natural gas. You know, buying electric cars or hybrid cars, you know, making sure we turn off our lights and doing all this to draw back our oil and gas use to be better citizens, you know, maybe subscribing with our electric company to, you know, renewable energy sources like wind or solar, only to find out that what the energy companies are doing, what the petrochemical companies are doing, are turning their attention to plastic. It used to be a side project for them, and now they see it more and more as a central part of their business strategy. So it's a little depressing. So just a little anthropological theory, very light, to say the least. But I'm just going back to Mary Douglas's work on purity and pollution. When we think about, we all know that she classified as pollution as basically, or dirt is matter out of place, and is part and parcel of us maintaining our moral order of the world, is that we have to address that pollution. And I think when we think about what's been going on with plastic of late, that we seem to be using more and more of it. And we live in very uncertain times, particularly with the COVID in the last year. You see everything is being wrapped in plastic. And it kind of reminds me of, you know, one of the tenets of her book was that, you know, the borders of society are threatened, then there's more vigilance in protecting the borders of the body. You see this play out in the grocery store where, you know, bagels and muffins are individually wrapped now. You see wrapping, and I'll come back to this again in a few minutes, but, you know, we wrap oranges and bananas in plastic. It's actually increased the problem. And of course, Western society, or, you know, Western Europe and North America, set an example for many developing countries, and certainly that's the case in the Dominican Republic. So in the developing world, when they see how Americans are behaving, you know, there's a standard that's set. And so we see these supermarkets and Western brands, and this, you know, packaging and plastic, you know, plasticizing of everything in their world is seen as somehow better. And that's kind of been happening in the Dominican Republic where I work. You know, this was a project that I was, again, very, not directly working on, but was, you know, was a dental health program in the Dominican Republic well over a decade. This is almost 20 years ago now. And every child in this that showed up got a nice little plastic bag full of plastic, you know, plastic toothbrushes, plastic floss, you know, toothpaste in plastic, with no kind of thought whatsoever what was going to happen to any of that plastic, any of that garbage. There's no infrastructure absolutely in place to deal with that. At the time, people were either burying or burning their trash. As we've moved on in the Dominican Republic, over these last 30 years, things are becoming more and more, quote, modern. We've gotten modern grocery stores, even in the rural region where I work. We have potable water there, I love to look at these statistics that say like 78% of the Dominican Republic has potable water. And I just scratch my head because no one I know can turn on a faucet and drink out of it. So the potable water that everyone has comes in these big 5-gallon jugs that are, you know, transported throughout the country on the back of trucks that are often sitting in the sun. These seals often break, causing other kinds of bacterial problems, but also it allows these chemicals to leach into that water. You know, I don't have to go on about how, you know, plastic water itself has become, you know, in these small bottles, it creates a huge disaster. And I could just have spent the whole hour talking about that. But also that, you know, at the local level, what we used to buy in the local mom and pop stores, colmados, you know, maybe by the teaspoons, they came out of big cans, are now all wrapped in plastic. And this is seen again as something that's much better for everyone. It's progress, it's, you know, becoming more modern, and the grocery stores look like this. Again, in a context where there is really no thought about what happens to the other end of this. You know, the solid waste management did not pre-exist before this, this boom in plastic happened. It is not sufficient now where it does exist in rural areas. There is often no solid waste management strategy at all. And it is just expected to be borne by the environment and the people on the ground. So we know that it's causing a lot of health crises in these poorer countries. The Dominican Republic, as I'm sure all of you know, is a big tourist destination where, you know, the last thing tourists want to see is a lot of garbage, especially garbage that just does not break down into anything sitting on the streets. But this is, you know, again, these municipalities aren't necessarily equipped to be able to manage all of this in a way that is efficient by any level. At any level. And, you know, these folks that are actually right behind this stream of houses here is the waterfront. And right behind this stream of houses up the hill is the dump. And now these very expensive apartments are filled with flies from the dump, which is growing and growing and growing as the local community is trying to deal with this onslaught of trash, particularly plastic trash. So we've all heard about the birds and the ocean life, whales, dolphins, fish that are filling up with plastic, but on the ground, you know, it's our dogs, our horses, our cats that are also exposed to this. And we've seen problems on the ground in the Dominican Republic when a horse swallows a bag of plastic or a dog swallows a bag of plastic. When it washes up on our shores, you know, because we don't have really great, you know, solid waste management strategies, it often will, during a downpour or, you know, a large storm, wash out into the bay where I work and then wash back up on shore, which is great because this is our second chance to remediate this problem. This is our second chance to, you know, capture that waste and get it out of the environment, you know, the pristine environment where, you know, people depend on the Bay of Samana where I work for fishing, for shrimp. And, but that's not what, again, you need an infrastructure there. And once a year, we do our annual, you know, beach cleanup throughout, you know, the country. And I think it goes on throughout the world now. That's not enough anymore. It needs to be like a daily or weekly cleanup, and it's not happening. So we do have programs for the 3 R's, which is now the 5 R's: refuse, reduce, reuse, repurpose, and recycle. And this is a friend of mine gave his wife this actually for Christmas, and this is from Kenya. And this is taken flip-flops off the beaches in Kenya and repurposing them, recycling them into artwork that gets sent out throughout the world, which is great, except the plastic flip-flops, I mean, it's hard to recognize what they are. They're all melted down and then reused that way. And I just cringed thinking about the health complications that might occur because of that. So what is anthropology to do about all of this? So I think as anthropologists, it behooves us to pay, as Mark Nichter asked us to do, more attention to this issue. We need to find out, you know, what people think plastic is, but we also need to, you know, not storm in as an environmentalist and tell people to stop using plastic, because plastic has obviously brought some great value. It would not be so successful and so ubiquitous if it hadn't been such a magical product. Case in point, we were doing the seminar that I did on applied anthropology and plastic. We concluded the semester, the dean gave us some money and we were handing out water, plastic bottles to kind of educate the campus community about it. And just as the president showed up for a photo shoot, someone dropped their bottle and smashed it. So we all know that's like, whoops, yeah, well, that's, you know, one of the problems with turning away from that. And so the question for us is, you know, what value does it bring to people at the home, in the home, the consumer level, and the community, people that are working in markets? How is it an essential product? And how and why has plastic become so integral to society? What did it replace, and how, and what can replace it? So I think, you know, at the local level, working, you know, on the ground, I think those are key questions for us to explore when we think about plastic and what's going on with plastic. At another level, and I think I speak mostly to people in Washington, D.C. here, is that we need to think more broadly also as anthropologists, as liaisons and advocates for our communities. You know, where did the onslaught of plastic originate, and how or who was to address the environmental disaster that it brought on? How did individuals, how is this allowed just to be brought into these communities with no kind of thinking about what was going to go on the other end? And do we as anthropologists then have roles in policy making, and perhaps being liaisons with corporations, with, you know, the different multinational corporations around the world? It's not in their best interest to continue doing this any more than it is in anyone's best interest, although there are a lot of people making money from this, obviously. So anyways, having just gone through all of that, I hope you didn't all fall asleep. I'd be happy to have a conversation about your experiences with plastic and what you think about ways to address this.
Thank you, Kathleen. That was great. I would like to invite anyone who has a question to raise your hand. If you go to the participants, you all know the drill. The participants, and click on it, you will find a way to raise your hand, I hope. That's usually how it works. And then maybe I can see who's, oh, that's chat. You have to get rid of the chat first. Uh-oh, I don't see that you can raise your hand. Matt, do we have that function on this?
Not that I know of.
Okay, then I guess you have to just show us your face and raise your hand physically.
Well, JP Mullen found it.
Oh, fabulous. Okay.
I just don't know where it is. Sorry.
I don't know. Jim, do you want to ask a question?
It's John. Hi, Lori.
Oh, John, sorry.
Right, you can raise your hand under the reactions of Zoom,
Okay.
where you can clap or, you know, give praise or raise your hand there. I don't know how to get it down right now though. Lower hand. Oh, you have to manually lower your hand. My question is also in alignment with one that I see in the chat box from Anna Fenzel, which is basically saying, how do you limit plastic in your own life? Most things that are glass seem to be more expensive. But I want to add to that, that now glass is no longer considered recyclable in Fairfax County where I live. So suddenly my choice of trying to not purchase plastic has ended because I
Wow.
can't recycle the glass.
I'm really shocked to hear that. That's disturbing news that they won't recycle glass. So it's a sacrifice. That's what I would say. I think that, we vote with our dollars a lot of times, but there are, Lori and I have had this conversation about going to co-ops. And for example, my local natural food store, I think I struck gold here with this natural food store, but I get to go in and buy so much in bulk. And one of the things that they sell in bulk are spices. And so I take in my bottles, they weigh them, they terraweight them, and then they fill them up, and then I pay for that. It's a fraction of what I would pay for spices in the grocery store. So I think sometimes we, and there are a lot of things in that health food store that are very expensive that I avoid, but there are some bargains to be had for sure. Tea is another one. So I think it takes a little extra work on our part. One of the things that I found really filled up my recycle bin was laundry detergent bottles, those great big heavy things. And online, there's a very simple recipe for how to make your own. And I'm not saying that there's not plastic in the containers that I get to make my my own laundry detergent, but it's far more reduced. And it's, again, so much cheaper than buying whisk in those big plastic jugs. So I think it takes a little extra work on the consumer's part to kind of try to do that. But I really hear you that it's, it's tough. And, like I try to save all my bottles in jars and reuse them. But you just, like, how many pickle jars can you use? And how often do you make pickles? So, I do think it's, kind of going back to a lifestyle where we can be, I think we found out that we can consume a lot less, but I'm not going to preach to anyone on that. And I think we all have to do the best that we can. The other thing I would say there, getting back to a policy issue, is that there are there's a lot of activism around this issue these days, where I live at least. Little nips are little liquor bottles that used to only get on planes, and they used to actually come in glass. They now come in plastic, and they sell them by those things fly off the shelf, and then they fly out of people's cars. And one of the things that I've been doing is I collect them. So I collect them all up, and I've been sending pictures to my state reps here, and they're working now. Hopefully there's a lot of activism around trying to get some more laws about, the amount of plastic. And then finally, I would say one last thing is, when you can avoid it, avoid it. There are a lot of places where you can avoid it in the supermarket. Those cucumbers that are all wrapped in plastic, I'm not sure what kind they are, but they're the longer, fancier ones. English cucumbers, I think they're called. I just would never buy one. I refuse to buy them. It's like, you can let the manager of the grocery store know, but you can also just avoid those projects or products whenever possible. But it's a conundrum. It's absolutely a problem. And I think, taking all the plastic you know, one shopping trip, undress everything, leave all the plastic in the cart and push it back in the grocery store. If you can kind of organize an action like that, maybe post-COVID, that's a real, you know, make it a publicity stunt, and, you know, raise awareness, because I think there's not enough awareness in the general public. But so thank you for that question.
We have a lot of interesting questions and comments in the chat box.
Okay.
If you can.
All right. Let's see. How, like, okay, seems awfully community specific, like low income areas wouldn't have access to health food stores such as that. Well, I guess it depends on where you live. In New Haven, we actually have a health food store, and it's, you know, one of the few grocery stores in New Haven, which is, you know, thankfully we have that, because as you know, there's urban deserts. But yeah, and so I don't mean to sound elitist, but so I guess it's going to sound a little elitist, but you know, about 10 years ago, I'm not sure, maybe 12 years ago now, we made a choice to put solar panels on our house. It was very expensive at the time, extremely expensive. We never saved a dollar. We pay more for electric than our neighbors because we leased those panels at a very high cost. But we also said, we can afford it, and we're going to make that sacrifice. And I think we all need to do what we can. So the fact that low-income people might not be able to live without being able to buy things in plastic or use plastic is not a good reason for us not to move forward where we can, when we can, how we can. So I guess that's how I would answer that. Although I would also say in the Dominican Republic, it is a huge issue because there is limited access to non-plastic routes to get your groceries home anymore. Plastic has been really thrust on them in a way that, at least in my community, they cannot avoid it. And it's not fair to ask them not to use plastic water in bottles. It's just not reasonable. So I think that we need to be conscious about that as we move forward. So.
Can I just make a comment?
Sure, please do.
In the developing world, the poor people cannot afford to buy large quantities of things. And so everything comes in a single-use plastic sachet. And that's one of the biggest problems with plastic. They're single-use, and normally they can't be recycled. I mean, there are programs working on that. But someone else mentioned another issue. Gideon Singer said, thanks for this talk. One of the most pervasive plastic-related dilemmas facing municipalities here and in the US and in Australia, where I did my dissertation fieldwork, is contamination. I don't know whether you mean the plastics that are to be recycled are contaminated, or whether plastics are contaminating things. Can you let us know what you mean, Gideon?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. So recycling contamination is a technical term for basically anytime you take mixed, like intermingled recycling to a facility. If there are soft plastics, non-plastics, food waste, oils, residues, that's the type of contamination that basically tends to fall back on ratepayers in communities, because cities will be charged a percentage of tons that's contaminated and things like that. And if you tour a recycling facility, which I have many times, you'll be really alarmed to see black goo oozing out of the recycling process. So even recycling, which is great, still produces waste, and contamination is one of the main culprits of that.
Yeah, Gideon, that's the other issue there is, I don't know if this is specifically what you're talking about, like when you take a plastic bottle and that little plastic ring that stays on it, that's a contaminated and they might not take it. So yeah, I agree. I think recycling is a PR stunt by plastic corporations. And that's why, you know, I subscribe to the 5 R's, which is, you know, like really refuse it whenever you can. But it is an environmental disaster. I mean, I don't think I have any magic solution to this. I noticed Suzanne, I think, I'm having a hard time reading all of these, but Suzanne mentioned that, so to make your own laundry detergent, you use washing powder. There's like 3 ingredients. And I don't think it's because everybody's starting to make their own detergent that suddenly it's getting harder to find. They pulled it out of my grocery store, and I actually go to a hardware store to get the ingredients now. Ironically, it seems really strange. But I do think that we're not dealing with plastic companies or plastic corporations. We're dealing with the petrochemical industry. It's a huge, powerful industry. You know, I think I am susceptible to conspiracy theories, but it just seems really odd to me that they wouldn't recycle glass. It's like, wow, that is really kind of interesting because it's such a recyclable product. And you just wonder where that's coming from. And there is a big pushback against plastic. I mean, I'm sure most of us have recognized it, you know, that this is coming down the line. In the Dominican Republic is just one small corner of the world. Plastic pollution has really threatened their tourism industry, and they're depending on where you get your data, one of the top 10 destinations in the world. It's, you know, become a huge player in terms of tourism, and plastic is hugely threatening that industry. So there's, you know, and there's a lot of attention from North America and Europe on, you know, dealing with this problem. So it's a huge issue.
I had a comment. One of the things that's bothered me for a long time is that is the medical world. Medical waste is just crazy. When I was a child, long ago, people used glass syringes. They sterilized instruments and so on. Now, maybe there were more infections. I don't know. But now everything's disposable. And since COVID, everything is really disposable, not only in healthcare settings, but we're being told to throw things away and not reuse things because we might catch COVID. So I just don't know where to begin with that. And as a medical anthropologist, I know that the pharmaceutical companies have always been lobbying the medical industry. They're always, you know, buying pizza to get somebody to prescribe to get a doc to prescribe a medicine. And I wouldn't doubt that the plastic makers, whoever they are, have worked hard to convince medicine that that's what they need, that they need plastic.
Well, in getting back to COVID, I mean, I was just horrified to see in the grocery store where they took individual bagels and wrapped each one. It's just like, it's so insane. But just think about how these vaccines are coming versus the polio vaccine I got when I was 5, right? Or however old I was back then, right? Those came in glass bottles, you know, like these are coming in big styrofoam. And, you know, I didn't even go into the whole styrofoam. There's so many aspects of this issue that you can't even begin to touch on, but, you know, absolutely. And the other side of it is, I think about this, I've thought about it several times, is, you know, I want my airplanes made out of plastic. I want them nice and light so I can fly. You know, there's certain things, you know, the tubes that doctors are using to keep blood running in me as I'm, you know, having open heart surgery, we need that. No, I don't need my glasses don't need to be plastic. Everything I touch doesn't need to be plastic. And it's not a renewable, I mean, it seems like, you know, we have caused so much damage to our planet extracting this, you know, these fossil fuels that are, you know, a limited quantity and very precious. And we treat them so disrespectfully. And I don't know, other than lobbying and political pressure, how else we're ever really going to get our arms around this issue and behavior. I mean, I think certainly, you know, us rejecting this en masse, it makes a big difference. There's been some really, I think it's Rwanda or Uganda has completely banned single use in Africa. What a big step, and how amazing is that? And we can't do that here. So
they're coming under a lot of pressure, Kathleen, from the petrochemical companies.
oh, I bet.
Imagine.
Yeah, I bet they are. But, you know, I mean, if we stood shoulder to shoulder with them, I don't, you know, I think we have to work harder, and we can do it statewide. So some states have really, you know, worked harder than other states. And I think some states are being affected by this, particularly on the coast, more than other states. So that's an issue as well. So I don't know if there's any other comments or questions. I have a hard time going through all these Zoom things.
It looks like Michael Feldman has his hand up. Michael, if you'd like to ask your question.
Yeah, thanks. And actually, I don't have a question. I just wanted to elevate a comment that I put in the chat, since there are so many, just to speak to the reason why glass isn't being recycled in certain municipalities. It's really an issue of recoverability, and with, you know, so many areas doing single stream recycling, the glass all shatters and falls to the bottom of the lot, and it just becomes something that is not cost effective, I guess, to recover. And so it ends up, it ends up being easier for municipalities to say they won't accept it because it's just not going to get recycled. And certain other places like Washington, D.C. accept it, but all the glass shards just get gathered up at the end and get used as landfill cover.
Yeah.
So they're being taken in, but they're not being recycled into other glass products. So anyways, that's just wanted to let you know that's why.
Thank you, Michael. And I would say that's depressing, but you know, cost is a huge issue here, and it's, you know, there's 7 different triangles, and I think I mentioned it earlier that some things are just more cost efficient to recycle than other things. So I'm not sure what numbers exactly they are, but like soda bottles and milk jugs do get recycled, and then like maybe our number 7s or our clamps, they don't get recycled because it's too expensive. So yeah, that does make sense. But it's, again, you know, we have to start making, you know, costly decisions. Yeah, we're running out of time with the planet, so I don't know if there was anything else.
Priscilla Lynn asks, what is the role of, if any, of burning plastic waste?
Yeah, so I don't remember if you folks remember the picture of you know, like a tent out in the desert. What I've seen is that burning plastic waste sometimes allows it to become airborne, and that is that it's not a completely efficient closed loop system. I don't know much about it. I haven't really explored it in any great depth. I know Lori might have something to say about that.
Yeah, it's called pyrolysis. The waste, I assume you mean waste to energy. And it depends only, it's very expensive to buy a really good waste to energy incinerator. But Montgomery County, for example, has them. And it's not the best use of plastic, but because all plastic is made of petroleum products, it does generate energy. And so that is how Montgomery County, Maryland heats all the government buildings with their pyrolysis. And they used to sell the excess. It's 36 times less greenhouse gases generated than an unsanitary landfill. And the worst thing you can do with plastic is to bury it even in a sanitary landfill, because it, as Kathleen said, it never goes away. Pyrolysis waste to energy is not a great solution, but it's a lot better than saving everything for a landfill. And I also just wanted to mention something, because we're talking about glass bottles, that there's something called the Alliance, I'll never remember what it means, Alliance to End Plastic Waste, which is a bunch of plastic manufacturers and plastic users. And companies that might be villains in some realms of their existence can be, in fact, heroes and heroines in plastic. So Coke and Pepsi wouldn't be my ideal of companies, but they're really pioneering refillable bottles, both plastic and going back to glass. So there is some concern. Kimberly-Clark, which is a huge user of packaging, of plastic packaging, is trying very hard to find other materials that aren't plastic, that are compostable. So there is some interest in the private sector. So, but as there are also some villains, as Kathleen mentioned.
Yeah, I would also say someone else brought that up about compostable plastic-like products. And I think it goes back to the earlier comment about class issues, because those products tend to be really expensive. So right now you can buy plastic forks and knives and spoons, I think out of bamboo. And, you know, which grows quickly, but God only knows what it's doing, you know, what kind of resources are being sucked up for that. Sorry, but it comes back to a class issue, and plastic is so cheap to make. And as we know, I think we know, probably most of you know, is that the oil and gas industry has enjoyed huge subsidies, right? That the green industries don't enjoy. So you know, it does come back again to kind of, you know, issues around social justice, I think, is a big part of this. So yeah.
I would just comment that there are now paper vodka bottles.
Yahoo. Okay.
America
Wow.
Zemba asks, in Africa, plastics are replacing locally made containers like pottery. What should be the role of anthropologists in this regard?
Yeah, well, I'm hardly one to tell other anthropologists what their roles are in this, in any regard. But what I would say, I think that's a really rough question. And I think that's a question that really all of us face as anthropologists when we look at material items, you know, things, the social life of things in our communities where we work, because I'm sure the pottery brings much more to the table, if you will, than just the fact that it's pottery and it's a container for carrying things. There's so much more you know, integrated into the social life of pottery, if you will, that's going to be lost when we lose that. And you know, I don't want to be a romanticist, but I think that there is, it's part of our job to kind of bring that to light at some level. But, you know, anthropologists study all kinds of things, and we don't all study these, you know, these material items in this way, but I do think it behooves us to kind of bring these issues to the attention to a broader audience, for people to appreciate this before, you know, this is gone. In the Dominican Republic where I work, we used to have mom and pop stores, little colmados, and they were, you know, you'd run over and you'd get a bottle. I've talked about this with Lori in the past, you know, the glass bottles that kids used to collect. That was like, you know, pocket change for these guys. It was ways for little kids to make money. They could come over and grab your soda bottle or your beer bottle and run it back to the store and make some money. Plastic took, you know, replaced all of that. So, you know, these systems are very much integrated, and, you know, there's a price to pay when we move away from those systems. And these colmados are almost, you know, they're becoming endangered now. We don't see them because these supermarkets are displacing them. Those were ways local, you know, that was more than just a way for a local family to make a living. It was also a community center. It was a way that we shared information. So there's, you know, these things are worth documenting, I guess, is all I would say about that.
Kind of piggybacking on what you just said about DR, this comes from Adam Coons. In the DR, is there any effort to educate folks about not tossing their plastic? Can we create a culture of not creating added plastic waste?
Yeah, I think so, Lori. You know, I think Lori might have something to say about that. But one thing I would say about that, again, in the community I work in, I went there first in 1985, so it's a really long time ago. The onslaught of plastic waste does not go unnoticed by the local, you know, population, local communities. I've had many conversations with people more likely in my age group, for sure, about how upset they are about it. But, you know, there's shifting culture, you know, as I've said before. And so, yeah, I think it's got to be a concerted effort by a lot of different people. And, you know, what do I do with my plastic waste? What do I do with it? If I don't, you know, I can burn it, but that's not a very good solution to burning plastic in, you know, in an open environment like that. It's very dangerous. So, you know, trying to bury it or trying to, you know, like do something with what are we supposed to do with it, right? Like, it's like before with the glass jars, like how many pickle jars can you use? Eventually you've got to get rid of them somehow. So it's a real conundrum. There's no easy answers here, I would say. Lori, did you want to say something about that?
Just that's my job, to try and figure that out.
Yes.
But you should know that even in the US, recycling education is just that, education. Here's what you have to do. No one bothers to do research to find out what is going to help people to understand that, or help people to want to do this without even knowing why, but to want to do it, to enable them to do, well, enable them, yes, but not to want to. And so this is true all over the world. And so that is why Kathleen was hired, and why I'm trying to give grants all over the world to do the fundamental, the formative research, hopefully with anthropologists. They're in the mixture somehow, local anthropologists, to try and figure out how do people perceive waste, all the good questions that all anthropologists would ask. How does this fit into overall life? How does this fit into the history of colonization? Because every place we're working has been colonized, almost every place, not every place. And so then you can figure out the cultural themes and what people can do and what they're able to do. And this has to be in a system, as Kathleen said. You have to have someplace to put your plastic. And then you can have the kind of participatory actions that we don't have most of the time. That this whole recycling education rather than participation lacks everywhere. And so that's something that anthropologists can do.
Yeah. Suzanne Leclerc mentions that there are communities that are taking plastic and reworking it into, you know, pieces of art or, you know, other utilitarian products. Where I live, there is a company that takes old fishing line that they're trying to recover and turn them into mats. I think that's going on in a lot of communities now. So I think that's, for me, that's really, you know, that's a really good use. That's reusing and repurposing plastic. But we also need to address the production end of it. We cannot continue to have this limitless supply of plastic because after a while we just will have too many mats. In different continents or at different places with this. So, yeah.
Kind of involved in that comment, Brian Bruns asks, are there social imaginaries without plastic or alternative visions for plastic? For example, in a sustainable circular economy, what role, if any, would there be for plastic?
Well, so again, I think other people probably are happy to have other people chime in on this, but I think that there's a lot of research being done on plant-based products that can replace what we use for plastic right now. So, you know, and we know this, you know, cotton bags in lieu of plastic bags, reusable bags, you know, making your masks out of, you know, cloth instead of plastic fibers. And so, yes, I absolutely think that we need to continue to imagine a world where we are doing different things. And even if that is going back to our ancestors to get ideas for some of that, or looking forward to new, you know, technological solutions, I think that's super important. Because again, you know, plastic is successful because it's very, you know, it's utilitarian. You know, it's doing some good in our world, and we need to rethink about how, in lieu of petrochemicals, we can create similar products. So, yeah.
Jennifer is making the connection between extended producer responsibility and the manufacture and the end life of plastic.
Yeah, no, it's a huge issue, I think. I think that manufacturers really do have to take some ownership, and that is the only way we're going to do that is through pressure at a government level. So I don't know if other people have ideas about that. Are we good? Are there any other comments?
There are a lot of comments. I think Matt and I are still looking.
Okay.
He's asking about behavior change.
Yes.
And,
I think you addressed that, Lori, so thank you.
well, actually, I kind of can address it if I could. I know what I was doing.
Yeah, you did. Okay. I think that's great. Thank you for having me so much. I really appreciate it. Opportunity to talk and share this. And for, you know, letting us think about something. We probably all needed a respite from the evening news. So
Just more of the evening news, I guess. Thank you so much. This was wonderful, and I learned a lot.
Thank you.
I learned a lot.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Lori, for putting this together and inviting Kathleen. It's great.
You did all the work. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
So
Okay.
let's all thank Kathleen.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to sign out.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Let you have your meeting. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.